March 28, 1942, 1:34 a.m. The coast of Nazi-occupied France. An ancient British destroyer, loaded with over 4 tons of explosives, is racing toward a heavily fortified German naval base at full speed. On board, 265 British Commandos know this is a one-way trip. The odds of survival? Less than 50%. The odds of success? Even worse. Their mission: ram a ship full of explosives into the only dry dock in Europe that can repair Germany's most powerful battleship, destroy it, and somehow make it home alive. It worked. The explosion destroyed the dock. The mission succeeded. But what happened next shocked everyone. Adolf Hitler himself personally intervened. Not to execute the captured commandos as was standard Nazi policy, not to torture them for information, but to spare their lives. He issued a direct order. These men are not to be executed. They fought with extraordinary courage. They will be treated as prisoners of war. The German naval commander at St. Nazaire wrote in his report, "Never in my life have I encountered such courage. These British commandos attacked a fortress with a floating bomb. They deserve to be honored, not killed. This is Operation Chariot, the raid so audacious, so impossibly brave, that even the Nazis respected it. This is the greatest commando raid of World War II. And I'm going to tell you exactly how 265 men pulled off the impossible. Every detail is documented. Every word is true. Let's begin. To understand why this raid happened, we need to talk about a ship, the Tirpitz, sister ship to the infamous Bismarck, the largest battleship ever built by Germany. 42,000 tons, 8 15-inch guns, armor thick enough to shrug off bombs and torpedoes. In early 1942, the Tirpitz was hiding in Norwegian fjords, just sitting there, not fighting, just existing. And it was tying down the entire British home fleet. Why? Because if the Tirpitz broke out into the Atlantic, it could devastate Allied convoys. Britain depended on those convoys. Food, supplies, oil, everything came across the Atlantic. One battleship, just one, could potentially starve Britain into surrender. So the Royal Navy had to keep multiple battleships, aircraft carriers, and dozens of escorts in home waters, just in case the Tirpitz decided to sail out. But there was a problem with the Tirpitz. If it got damaged, where could Germany repair it? There was only one dry dock in Europe large enough to handle a ship that size. The Normandy dock at St. Nazaire, France, built in the 1930s to service the massive French ocean liner Normandy. It could handle ships up to 50,000 tons. British naval intelligence realized something crucial. If that dock was destroyed, the Tirpitz would have nowhere to go for major repairs. Damage the Tirpitz in battle, and it would have to limp all the way back to Germany, through waters patrolled by the Royal Navy. Without that dock, the Tirpitz would be effectively neutralized. Germany wouldn't risk it in combat if there was nowhere nearby to repair battle damage. Destroy the dock at St. Nazaire and you solve the Tirpitz problem. There was just one tiny issue. St. Nazaire was one of the most heavily defended locations in Nazi-occupied Europe. Coastal artillery, anti-aircraft guns, searchlights, naval patrols, thousands of German troops, U-boat pens made of reinforced concrete. It was a fortress, and it was 5 miles up the Loire River estuary. Shallow water, sandbanks, heavily mined. Any attacking force would be channeled into a narrow approach, under constant fire, with nowhere to hide. Attacking St. Nazaire wasn't just difficult, it was suicidal, which is exactly why Combined Operations Headquarters decided to do it. The plan was insane. Let me walk you through it. Step 1. Take an old destroyer, HMS Campbeltown, a former American ship. Pack the bow with 4.5 tons of high explosives on a delayed fuse. Step 2. Disguise it as a German destroyer. Cut down the smokestacks to match German profiles. Paint German markings on it. Fly German flags. Step 3. Load 265 Commandos onto the Campbeltown and 18 small motor launches. Sail 400 miles across the Atlantic. Enter the Loire estuary at night. Step 4. Ram the Campbeltown into the outer gate of the Normandy dock at full speed. Wedge it in there like a cork in a bottle. Step 5. While German forces are confused, Commandos storm ashore and destroy everything they can. Pumping stations, winding gear, lock gates, U-boat facilities, anything that makes the port useful. Step 6. Evacuate on the motor launches and make it back to England. Step 7. 12 hours later, the Campbeltown explodes, destroying the dock gate and killing any Germans who've boarded the ship thinking it's safe. Simple, right? Except for the part where you have to sail up a heavily defended river, ram a ship full of explosives into a dock gate, fight through thousands of German troops, then somehow make it home alive. When Combined Operations first presented this plan to the Admiralty, the response was, "This is madness, you'll lose everyone." They were probably right, but Britain was desperate. This was March 1942. Germany was winning. The Blitz had devastated British cities. U-boats were sinking hundreds of thousands of tons of shipping. North Africa was a disaster. Singapore had just fallen. Britain needed a victory. Any victory, even a suicidal one. The man chosen to lead this raid was Lieutenant Colonel Charles Newman, 37 years old, commander of No. 2 Commando, a civil engineer before the war, not a career soldier, just a determined man who volunteered for the most dangerous service in the British military. The naval commander was Commander Robert Ryder, 34 years old, Royal Navy, experienced destroyer captain. He understood exactly how dangerous this was. Both men were told, "You probably won't come back, but if you succeed, you'll save thousands of lives and change the course of the war." They accepted immediately. Volunteers were called for. Everyone who heard the plan understood it was likely a one-way trip. Everyone volunteered anyway. 265 men, most of them in their 20s, some teenagers. They trained for weeks, practiced boarding from small boats, rehearsed demolition procedures, studied models of St. Nazaire until they could navigate it blindfolded. And on March 26, 1942, they set sail. The force sailed from Falmouth, England. HMS Campbeltown, escorted by 18 motor launches and a motor gunboat. It took them 2 days to cross the Atlantic. 400 miles of open ocean, U-boat-infested waters, under constant threat of German air attack. They traveled during the day, knowing German reconnaissance planes would spot them. That was intentional. They wanted to be seen, heading south, as if they were an anti-submarine patrol or convoy escort. At night, they turned east towards St. Nazaire, March 27th, late afternoon. They were spotted by a German U-boat, U-593. The U-boat surfaced, saw the British ships, and crash-dived to escape. The British let it go, didn't attack, let the U-boat report them. Again, this was intentional. They wanted the Germans to think this was just a normal patrol that had wandered too close to the coast. By nightfall on March 27th, they were approaching the mouth of the Loire River. This is where it got dangerous. The estuary was narrow, heavily mined, strong tides and currents, sandbanks that could ground a ship in seconds. And on both sides, German coastal batteries with searchlights and heavy guns. They had to navigate a 6-mile channel in complete darkness. No lights, no navigation aids, using only charts and dead reckoning. Commander Ryder brought them in at 20 knots. Fast, too fast for safety. But speed was the only defense they had. 1 a.m., March 28th. They were 5 miles from St. Nazaire, still undetected. The German garrison was on alert because of the U-boat report, but they expected an air raid, not a naval attack. Who would be crazy enough to sail ships up the Loire? 1:22 a.m. Searchlights from shore swept across the water. They caught the lead ships. A German signal station flashed a challenge. What ships? The British signalman, who spoke fluent German, replied. 2 damaged German torpedo boats seeking permission to enter harbor. The Germans bought it. For a few precious minutes, the searchlights moved away. 1:27 a.m. They were less than a mile from the dock. HMS Campbeltown increased to flank speed, 19 knots, the engines screaming. The German signal station flashed again. Identify yourselves immediately or we fire. The British signalman replied, requesting emergency docking, under attack from British forces. The Germans hesitated, confused, trying to figure out what was happening. And then, at 1:30 a.m., the British dropped the charade. They hauled down the German flags, ran up the white ensign, the British naval flag, and every gun on every ship opened fire. All hell broke loose. German shore batteries immediately returned fire. 40mm and 20mm anti-aircraft guns. Tracer fire lighting up the night. Shells exploding in the water. Searchlights blinding the British crews. HMS Campbeltown charged straight ahead. Shells were hitting her superstructure. Men were falling on deck, but she kept going. Her forward gun was firing at the searchlights, trying to blind them. Her machine guns were raking German positions on the dock. 1:34 a.m. HMS Campbeltown rammed the dock gate at 19 knots. The impact threw men off their feet. The bow crumpled, wedging itself firmly into the massive steel gate. The ship was stuck exactly where it needed to be. All hell broke loose. German shore batteries immediately returned fire. 40mm and 20mm anti-aircraft guns. Tracer fire lighting up the night. Shells exploding in the water. Searchlights blinding the British crews. HMS Campbeltown charged straight ahead. Shells were hitting her superstructure. Men were falling on deck, but she kept going. Her forward gun was firing at the searchlights, trying to blind them. Her machine guns were raking German positions on the dock. 1:34 a.m. HMS Campbeltown rammed the dock gate at 19 knots. The impact threw men off their feet. The bow crumpled, wedging itself firmly into the massive steel gate. The ship was stuck exactly where it needed to be. Inside the bow, hidden behind a steel shield, were 4.5 tons of depth charges, configured as a massive bomb. The fuses were set for 8 hours. Actually, they'd set them for 8 hours, but the fuses were unreliable, so no one really knew when it would blow. Commandos poured off the Campbeltown, scaling ladders, jumping onto the dock, under intense fire. Some men were shot before they even left the ship. Others made it to cover and began their demolition work. Sergeant Tom Durant was manning a machine gun on one of the motor launches. His boat was hit repeatedly. Everyone around him was killed or wounded. Durant was shot multiple times, but he kept firing, kept engaging German positions, covering the other boats. He would later die from his wounds and posthumously receive the Victoria Cross. The motor launches were supposed to evacuate the Commandos after the raid. but most of them were destroyed in the approach. German guns were tearing them apart. Of the 18 motor launches, only 3 made it back to England. The others were sunk or so damaged they had to be abandoned. This meant most of the Commandos were trapped. No way home. They knew it, and they kept fighting anyway. Demolition teams moved through the dock complex. They had specific targets, memorized from the training models. By 3 a.m., the battle was effectively over. The demolitions were complete. The Campbeltown was wedged firmly in the dock gate. But most of the Commandos were either dead, wounded, or captured. Of the 265 Commandos who started the raid, only 228 made it ashore. Of those, only 5 made it back to England on the motor launches. 169 were killed or missing. The rest were captured. The German garrison thought they'd won. They'd repelled the raid, captured most of the attackers. Sure, there was some damage, but nothing catastrophic. And they had this British destroyer wedged in the dock. Curious German officers and soldiers boarded it, explored it, tried to figure out why the British would ram a destroyer into a dock. No one had found the explosives yet. Okay, pause here for a second. If this story is blowing your mind, hit that like button and drop a comment. Would you volunteer for a mission like this, knowing you probably won't come home? I want to know, because here's where the story gets even more incredible. That bomb in the Campbeltown's bow, it's about to go off, with hundreds of German soldiers standing on and around the ship. Let's get to the explosion. March 28, 1942, late morning, about 10:30 a.m. The Campbeltown had been wedged in the dock gate for about 9 hours. German engineers were swarming over it, trying to figure out how to remove it, examining the damage. On the dock itself, German and French workers were assessing what needed to be repaired. Senior German naval officers were conducting an inspection. Approximately 360 people were on or near the Campbeltown. At 10:35 a.m., the delayed action fuses detonated. 4.5 tons of high explosives detonated in a confined space. The explosion was catastrophic. Witnesses several miles away reported seeing a massive column of water and debris shoot hundreds of feet into the air. The shockwave shattered windows across St. Nazaire. The sound was heard 15 miles away. The Campbeltown essentially disintegrated. The bow, where the explosives were hidden, simply ceased to exist. What remained of the ship was unrecognizable twisted metal. The outer caisson gate, the massive steel gate of the Normandy dock, was destroyed, utterly destroyed, blown into pieces. The dock itself was wrecked. Pumping chambers flooded, machinery buried under rubble, and the human cost on the German side was horrific. Estimates vary, but at least 360 German soldiers, sailors, and French dock workers were killed instantly. Hundreds more were wounded. Some bodies were never found, simply vaporized. Senior German officers who had been inspecting the dock were among the dead. The commander of the 333rd Infantry Division was seriously wounded. The Germans were in shock. Panic spread through the garrison. They thought it was a delayed air raid. Everyone scrambled for cover. The entire port was shut down for hours. The British had done it. The Normandy dock at St. Nazaire was completely unusable. It would remain unusable for the rest of the war. In fact, it wasn't fully repaired until the 1950s, nearly 10 years after the raid. The only dry dock in Europe capable of servicing the Tirpitz was gone. The Tirpitz never left Norwegian waters for the rest of the war. It couldn't risk major combat without a nearby repair facility. It became effectively useless. Eventually, it was sunk by British bombers in 1944, having never fulfilled its potential. One raid, 265 men, most of them captured or killed. But the mission succeeded. Now comes the remarkable part. After the explosion, after the shock wore off, German commanders had to decide what to do with the captured British commandos. In 1942, Hitler had already issued orders about commandos. He considered them terrorists, not soldiers. They didn't wear proper uniforms. They attacked behind enemy lines. They didn't fight honorably. The standard German practice was to execute captured commandos immediately. Summary execution. No trial. Just line them up and shoot them. The captured men from Operation Chariot knew this. They expected to be executed. Some had made peace with it. They'd volunteered for a suicide mission. Death was always part of the deal. But something unexpected happened. The German naval commander at St. Nazaire, Kapitän Zerzay Karl Konrad Mecke, wrote a report to his superiors. In it, he described the raid, the audacity, the courage, the effectiveness. Then he wrote something extraordinary. Pause, quote voice respectful. Never in my life have I encountered such courage. These British commandos attacked a fortress with a floating bomb, knowing they would likely die. They fought with incredible bravery. They succeeded in their mission at enormous cost. Such men deserve to be honored as warriors, not executed as criminals. Mecke recommended that the captured commandos be treated as prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention. His report went up the chain of command, to the Kriegsmarine headquarters, to the Wehrmacht High Command, and eventually to Hitler himself. Hitler read the report, and he agreed. On April 1st, 1942, Hitler personally issued an order. The British commandos captured at St. Nazaire fought with exceptional courage and daring. They are to be treated as prisoners of war, not as terrorists. They will be held in standard POW camps and accorded all rights under international law. Hitler, Adolf Hitler, spared them, not out of mercy, but out of respect. He was so impressed by their courage that he personally intervened to save their lives. This wasn't publicized at the time. The British didn't know about it until after the war. The captured commandos just knew they weren't being executed, and they didn't know why. But German records are clear. Hitler's order exists. It's documented. The man who ordered the Holocaust, who showed no mercy to millions, who executed countless prisoners, spared these British commandos because they impressed him. Some of the German guards even expressed admiration. One guard reportedly told a captured commando, "You English are crazy, but you are also very brave. We respect that." Another German officer said, "This raid will be studied in military academies for generations. You attacked the impossible and succeeded." Operation Chariot succeeded, but the cost was devastating. Of the 611 men who participated in the raid, that's 265 commandos and 346 Royal Navy personnel, only 228 made it back to England. 169 were killed. 215 were captured. The casualty rate was over 60%. But what they achieved was extraordinary. The Normandy dock was destroyed for the duration of the war. This neutralized the Tirpitz as an Atlantic threat. It allowed Britain to redeploy naval forces that had been tied down, protecting against the Tirpitz. The raid also destroyed numerous U-boat facilities, fuel storage, and equipment. It temporarily disrupted German U-boat operations in the Atlantic. And strategically, It proved that Britain could strike at occupied Europe. It boosted British morale at a desperately dark time. It showed that Germany wasn't invincible. The British government recognized the extraordinary courage of the raiders. 5 Victoria Crosses were awarded. The Victoria Cross is Britain's highest military honor. 5 VCs in a single action is almost unprecedented. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Newman, the Commando leader. Victoria Cross. Commander Robert Ryder, the naval commander. Victoria Cross. Lieutenant Commander Stephen Beatty, captain of HMS Campbeltown. Victoria Cross. Able seaman William Savage, who continued firing his gun despite fatal wounds. Posthumous Victoria Cross. Sergeant Thomas Durant, the machine gunner who fought until he died. Posthumous Victoria Cross. In addition, 4 Distinguished Service Orders, 17 Distinguished Service Crosses, 11 Military Crosses, 24 Distinguished Service Medals, 15 Military Medals, and 51 mentions in dispatches. Nearly every man who participated received some form of recognition. This was the most heavily decorated single action in British military history. The survivors spent the rest of the war in POW camps. Thanks to Hitler's order, they were treated relatively well by German standards. No torture, no execution, just standard imprisonment. They were liberated in 1945 when Allied forces overran Germany. Most survived the war. The men who died were buried with military honors by the Germans. Another unusual gesture of respect. Their graves were maintained throughout the war. Operation Chariot didn't just destroy a dock. It changed how special operations were conducted. This raid proved that small, highly trained forces could achieve strategic objectives that large conventional forces couldn't. The success at St. Nazaire led directly to the expansion of British commando units. It validated the concept of special operations. It influenced the creation of similar units in other Allied nations. The American Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, predecessor to the CIA, studied Operation Chariot extensively. It influenced their operational doctrine. The raid also had psychological impact. For Britain, it was a massive morale boost. Early 1942 was bleak, defeats everywhere. Operation Chariot showed that Britain could still fight, could still win, could still strike at the heart of Nazi-occupied Europe. For Germany, it was a wake-up call. If the British could raid St. Nazaire, what else could they do? Germany had to divert significant resources to coastal defense, troops that could have been used elsewhere. The raid also affected German policy on commandos, temporarily. Hitler's order to spare the St. Nazaire commandos was an exception, not a rule change. Later in 1942, he issued the infamous Commando Order, Kommandobefehl, which ordered the execution of all captured commandos regardless of circumstances. But significantly, the order specifically exempted commandos captured during recognized operations of war, like St. Nazaire. Even Hitler couldn't bring himself to execute men who had fought that bravely. The Normandy dock itself remained destroyed until well after the war. When France was liberated in 1944, Allied engineers surveyed the damage. The report concluded, the dock is a total loss. Repair would effectively mean building a new dock. Estimated time, 5 to 7 years. They were right. The dock wasn't fully operational again until 1948, 6 years after the raid. For the cost of one old destroyer and the lives of 169 brave men. Britain had removed a critical strategic asset from German use for the entire war. The men who survived Operation Chariot rarely spoke about it publicly. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Newman spent 3 years in a POW camp. He was liberated in 1945, returned to Britain a hero, but struggled with survivor's guilt. So many of his men had died. Why had he lived? He received his Victoria Cross from King George VI in a ceremony at Buckingham Palace. He later said, "This medal belongs to all the men who went to St. Nazaire. I'm just holding it for them." Newman lived until 1972. He never stopped honoring his fallen comrades. Commander Robert Ryder also survived the war as a POW. He returned to the Royal Navy, eventually reaching the rank of captain. He wrote a book about the raid, The Attack on St. Nazaire. In it, he described the moment the Campbeltown rammed the dock. "We hit the gate at exactly the right spot, at exactly the right speed. In that moment, I knew we'd succeeded. Whatever happened next, the mission was accomplished." Lieutenant Commander Stephen Beatty, captain of the Campbeltown, was awarded the Victoria Cross for ramming the dock and then organizing the Commando landings under fire. He spent the rest of the war in German POW camps. Fellow prisoners said he remained upbeat, always maintaining that the raid had been worth it. He survived the war and lived until 1975. Able Seaman William Savage, one of the posthumous Victoria Cross recipients, was 20 years old when he died. He was manning the forward gun on the Campbeltown during the approach. When the ship was under intense fire, when most of the deck crew had been killed or wounded, Savage stayed at his post. He kept firing, kept suppressing German gun positions. Even after being mortally wounded, he continued to fire until he died. His gun continued to operate because of him. His sacrifice saved countless lives by keeping German gunners pinned down during the landing. His Victoria Cross citation reads, "Able Seaman Savage displayed great bravery and devotion to duty. Though mortally wounded, he continued to engage the enemy until he died at his post." Sergeant Thomas Durant, the other posthumous Victoria Cross recipient, fought aboard Motor Launch 306. His boat was hit repeatedly. Everyone around him was killed or wounded. He was shot multiple times. Sources say anywhere from 10 to 16 times. But he kept firing his machine gun, kept engaging German positions, covering the retreat of other boats. When Motor Launch 306 finally surrendered, German sailors found Durant slumped over his gun. Still alive. Barely. Here's the remarkable part. The German naval officer who accepted the surrender was so impressed by Durant's courage that he recommended Durant for the Victoria Cross. A German officer recommending an enemy soldier for Britain's highest honor. Durant died of his wounds shortly after. The German officer's recommendation, along with testimony from British survivors, led to Durant receiving the Victoria Cross posthumously. The German officer later said, "This man fought with the courage of a lion. I have never seen such bravery. He deserved to be honored." Take a second. Just think about that. A German naval officer, in the middle of a war, recommending his enemy for a medal because he was so impressed by his courage. Drop a comment. What does this say about honor in warfare? Can enemies respect each other even while trying to kill each other? Because this raid proved something profound, that courage transcends nationality, that honor can exist even in the midst of total war. Let's bring this home. Today, St. Nazaire hosts a memorial to Operation Chariot. In the exact spot where the Campbeltown rammed the dock gate, there's a monument. It was erected by the French after the war. It honors both the British Commandos who fought there and the French civilians who died in the explosion. Every year on March 28th, veterans and their families gather there. British, French, and sometimes even German veterans. Old men who were once enemies, now standing together, honoring the courage displayed that night. The British survivors formed an association, the St. Nazaire Society. They met annually to remember their fallen comrades. As of 2024, the last survivors have passed away, but their descendants continue the tradition. The raid has been studied in military academies worldwide. Sandhurst, West Point, the French École Spéciale Militaire, even the German Führungsakademie der Bundeswehr. It's considered one of the greatest raids in military history. The planning, the execution, the audacity, the courage. It's taught as a masterclass in special operations. But beyond the tactical lessons, it teaches something deeper. It proves that impossible missions can succeed. That courage and determination can overcome overwhelming odds. That small groups of dedicated individuals can change the course of history. 265 men attacked a fortress. Most knew they wouldn't come home. They went anyway, and they won. The raid also proves something about human nature. Even in the midst of the most brutal war in history, honor existed. The German naval commander recognized courage when he saw it. Hitler himself, for all his evil, couldn't bring himself to execute men who had fought that bravely. That doesn't excuse Nazi atrocities. Nothing does. But it shows that even in darkness, moments of recognition and respect can exist. The German officer who recommended Durant for the Victoria Cross could have just let him die anonymously. But he didn't. He honored his enemy's courage. The St. Nazaire raid succeeded militarily. It destroyed the dock. It neutralized the Tirpitz. It boosted British morale. It proved special operations could work. But maybe its greatest achievement was proving that courage is universal, that honor transcends nationality, that even enemies can recognize bravery in each other. In a war defined by hatred and atrocity, that recognition mattered. So how did this impossible mission actually succeed? Factor number 1, audacity. The Germans never expected anyone to be crazy enough to ram a destroyer into their dock. It was too bold, too reckless, too impossible. That's exactly why it worked. The Germans prepared for air raids, submarine attacks, conventional naval assault. They didn't prepare for someone to turn a ship into a guided missile. Sometimes the best strategy is the one your enemy thinks is insane. Factor number 2, deception. The disguise worked. For those crucial minutes approaching the harbor, the Germans thought the Campbeltown was one of theirs. That hesitation was enough. The British signalman's fluent German bought them precious time. Every second counted. Factor number 3, speed and violence. Once they were detected, the British didn't slow down or retreat. They accelerated, pushed through the fire, rammed the target at full speed. In special operations, once you're committed, the only way forward is through. Hesitation gets you killed. Aggression gives you a chance. Factor number 4, training and preparation. Those commandos knew exactly what to do. They'd practiced for weeks. They knew their targets, their demolition procedures, their backup plans. When chaos erupted, and it always does, they executed their mission because the training was instinctive. Factor number 5, sacrifice. The men knew this was likely a one-way trip. They went anyway. When the motor launches were destroyed and there was no way home, they didn't surrender. They completed their mission first. Savage stayed at his gun until he died. Durant fought until his body gave out. Demolition teams set their charges even as German troops closed in. They prioritized the mission over their own survival. That's why it worked. Factor number 6, the delayed explosion. This was brilliant. If the Campbeltown had exploded immediately, the Germans might have been able to contain the damage. repair crews would have stayed away. But the 12-hour delay, that lured hundreds of Germans onto the ship and dock. They thought the raid had failed. They thought it was safe. And then the bomb went off. Maximum damage. Maximum psychological impact. All these factors combined into one perfect storm of audacity, planning, and courage. That's why Operation Chariot succeeded where it should have failed. Operation Chariot, the raid so audacious that Hitler himself ordered the survivors spared. March 28, 1942. 265 British commandos attacked the most heavily defended port in Nazi-occupied Europe. They rammed a destroyer packed with explosives into the only dock that could service Germany's most powerful battleship. 169 men died. 215 were captured. Only 228 made it home. But the mission succeeded. The Normandy dock was destroyed. The Tirpitz was neutralized. British morale soared. And the world learned that Britain could still strike back. The German naval commander wrote, "Never have I encountered such courage." Hitler agreed and spared their lives. 5 Victoria Crosses, dozens more decorations. The most heavily decorated single action in British military history. And decades later, former enemies gathered at St. Nazaire to honor the courage displayed on both sides that night. Because this raid proved something profound. Courage is universal. Honor transcends nationality. Even in the darkest of wars, respect can exist between enemies. Now, I want to hear from you. Final question. What struck you most about this story? The audacity of the plan? The sacrifice of the men? Hitler's unexpected decision to spare them? The German commander's respect? Drop a comment below. I read every one. And if this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with anyone who loves military history or just incredible stories of human courage. These stories need to be told. These sacrifices need to be remembered. Thank you for watching. Thank you for honoring their memory. And remember, sometimes the most impossible missions are the ones that need to be done anyway. Until next time, stay brave, stay curious, and never forget that small groups of determined people can change the world. 265 men attacked a fortress. Most died, but they won. Never forget Operation Chariot.